Jax's revenge domain. "I'm cleaning house now," Mason Walsh announced, standing on a goddamn cafeteria table, like he was about to declare himself emperor of the known universe. Except instead of unveiling some grand vision, he pointed straight at me and yelled, "Wesley, you're out! Effective immediately!" Coffee cups froze midair. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. All I heard was that buzzing silence you get right before a car wreck. The kid just fired me in front of 40 employees while eating a protein bar and calling it trimming the dead weight. I'm Wesley Adams, 49 years old, and I'd been keeping Summit Technologies running for 13 years. But Mason didn't care about any of that. I didn't say a word, didn't flinch. Just pulled the master access credentials from my briefcase, the same ring of keys and security tokens I'd carried since the Bush administration. Held them up like a bartender sliding a drink to a problem customer and said, "Good luck with that." He smirked like he just conquered Wall Street, like I was some glorified maintenance guy who'd finally been shown the door. But what Mason didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that those weren't just door keys. They were system authenticators, compliance certifications, vendor access codes, federal filing authorities. Some of them didn't even open physical locks anymore. They were the locks. Let me back up a bit. Mason Walsh wasn't born, he was minted. You could smell the trust fund coming off his designer cologne from 3 cubicles away. He didn't climb any corporate ladder, he floated down on a golden parachute with Daddy's initials embroidered on it. His father, Hunter Walsh, had built Summit Technologies from nothing back in the early 2000s. Smart guy. Hunter. Understood that running a tech company meant more than just having the shiniest gadgets. When Hunter stepped back 18 months ago for what he called personal reflection time, the board reluctantly named Mason interim CEO. The kid was 28 years old and had spent most of his post-college years finding himself in various startup accelerators and networking events. Within a week of taking over, he was calling himself a disruptive visionary and referring to himself in third person during meetings. Mason's first month was like watching a tornado hit a library. He changed the company mission statement 3 times, installed a kombucha bar in the break room, and declared that all meetings would now be walking conversations held outdoors. Never mind that half our staff dealt with classified client data that couldn't leave the building. Details like that didn't matter to Mason's vision of organic innovation. Then came what he called the Great Simplification. Mason had attended some Silicon Valley conference about lean operations and came back convinced that Summit Technologies was drowning in unnecessary complexity. He wanted to strip away layers, eliminate redundancy, create what he called elegant operational flow. What he actually created was chaos. The purge started small. He fired Jerry, our company historian, who'd been with us for 8 years and maintained all our institutional knowledge documentation. Poor guy cried quietly into his cardigan as security walked him out. Then Mason slashed the employee wellness program, calling it corporate coddling, and terminated 2 remote workers over Zoom calls. He actually muted them halfway through their goodbyes because he had another meeting to get to. But I was the prize, the power move he really wanted. Mason needed a scapegoat with name recognition to prove the old guard was finished. Someone whose firing would send a message that his vision of the future had no room for legacy thinking. The thing is, I wasn't just some operations guy you could swap out like a broken printer. Over 13 years, I'd become something Hunter used to call the institutional anchor. I knew which servers couldn't be restarted without a specific sequence. I remembered which vendor contracts had verbal addendums that weren't in the files. I was the guy who stayed overnight during the ransomware scare in 2019, manually verifying every system as we brought them back online. When the fire inspector said our server room setup violated safety codes in 2020, I was the one who negotiated the compliance waiver. I had signing authority on infrastructure leases, vendor contracts, federal filing protocols. Hunter had given me access to everything because he trusted me to handle the boring, critical stuff that kept the company running while he focused on the big picture. Mason saw none of that. To him, I was just another middle-aged guy in khakis who talked too much about proper procedures and slowed down his revolutionary changes with questions about compliance and safety protocols. So when he stood on that cafeteria table like some discount Steve Jobs and declared me dead weight, he had no idea what he was actually cutting loose. I was the one person who understood the difference between the org chart and how things actually worked. The one who knew that our sleek, modern systems were held together by a complex web of relationships, agreements, and institutional knowledge that existed mostly in my head. I didn't cry. I didn't protest. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. I walked past the reception desk, past the stunned interns, past that motivational poster I'd always hated. Teamwork makes the dream work, and straight to the parking garage. I sat in my car for a long while, staring at those credentials in my palm. They felt heavier than usual, not with metal, but with memory, authority, leverage. Then I opened my glove compartment and pulled out the blue compliance binder I kept there for emergencies. Summit Technologies operational protocols, custodial access documentation, the boring stuff that kept us legal and operational while Mason played visionary. 13 years ago, when Hunter first brought me on as senior operations manager, he'd said something I never forgot. Wesley, I need someone who understands that the flashy stuff gets the headlines, but the boring stuff keeps the lights on. He wasn't wrong. While everyone else was focused on product launches and market penetration, I was the one making sure we didn't lose our federal certifications or violate vendor agreements. I was the one who stayed overnight during the ransomware scare in 2019, manually verifying every system as we brought them back online. When the fire inspector said our server room setup violated safety codes in 2020, I spent 3 weeks negotiating compliance waivers and redesigning our infrastructure layout. I had signing authority on everything that mattered: infrastructure leases, vendor contracts, federal compliance filings, security certifications. Hunter had trusted me with what he called the keys to the kingdom, and I'd never let him down, not once in 13 years. Now his son had just tossed me out like yesterday's coffee grounds, and he had no idea what he'd actually done. My house felt different when I got home that afternoon. Quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. I sat at my kitchen table and opened that compliance binder I hadn't needed to reference in months. Inside was everything Mason didn't think to ask about when he demanded I hand over my credentials. Every security override protocol, every emergency vendor contact, every backup procedure Hunter and I had established during the early days when we were building servers from second-hand parts and praying the fire suppression system wouldn't go off accidentally. On page 1, in black and white, Wesley Adams named Operations Custodian. See, when you don't demand corner offices or executive parking spots, when you don't send company-wide emails about your achievements, people tend to forget exactly what authority you hold. Mason had spent his whole brief tenure focused on the org chart, but the real power at Summit Technologies lived in the fine print of contracts and compliance documents that he'd never bothered to read. I poured myself a beer and started making calls. Quiet ones, professional ones. First was Samantha White at Cloud Vault Hosting, our primary server provider. She answered on the second ring, voice tense. Wesley, thank God. We just got a credential error notification on your account. Are you okay? The automated system says your access was terminated, but that can't be right. Hey, Sam, I said, keeping my voice steady. Just a heads up. I'm no longer authorized to approve maintenance overrides or emergency protocols on the primary servers. My access was officially terminated this afternoon. Dead silence on her end. Then, but your biometric signature is still the primary authorization contact for all critical systems. We can't process server maintenance requests without your clearance. Not my problem anymore, Sam. You'll need to work with Mason Walsh or whoever he designates. Wesley, it doesn't work that way. The federal compliance framework requires 30 days advance notice for custodial officer changes. We can't just switch authorization protocols overnight. I took a sip of my beer. Like I said, not my problem anymore. Next call was to Garrett Thompson at Secure Access Solutions, our physical and digital security vendor. He actually chuckled when I told him about my termination. That explains the dashboard errors we've been seeing all afternoon, he said. Mason's people tried rebooting the access control server around 3 p.m. and somehow froze half the badge readers. They're requesting emergency admin tokens, but I need your biometric confirmation to issue them. Can't help you there, Garrett. I'm no longer with the company. Jesus, Wesley, do they understand what they've done? Your authorization codes are hardwired into everything. Badge access, building climate control, security cameras, even the fire suppression systems. Without your clearance, I can't authorize anyone else to make changes. Sounds like something they'll need to figure out. Each call was surgical. No bitterness, no sabotage, just professional absence. The sudden, deafening silence of 1,000 critical tasks disappearing into the void. The first sign something was seriously wrong came the next morning at 7:15 a.m. when Mason tried to badge into the main building. The card reader gave him a long, disappointed beep. He swiped again. Same sound. Then again, jamming the card harder like it owed him rent money. Shane Murphy, our facilities guy who'd been there since the Clinton administration, was mopping the lobby and just shrugged. Sometimes you gotta sweet-talk those things. Or maybe ask Wesley about it. Mason went pale. He doesn't work here anymore. Shane stopped mopping and looked up. Ah, well, that explains the emails I got this morning about system authorization errors. Figured something was up. By 8:30 a.m., half the company was stranded outside in the parking lot, crowding around. Badge readers like confused tourists at a locked museum. The morning shift from our manufacturing floor couldn't get in. 3 executives stood in business suits, jabbing their cards at readers and getting nothing but error beeps. Mason got Jordan Palmer, our IT director, on speakerphone right there in the parking lot. Poor Jordan sounded like he'd been awake all night. "We can't provision new badge access until we transfer the master administrative credentials," Jordan explained, his patience wearing thin. The root administrator was Wesley. According to our system logs, he's still the only one authorized to create new admin accounts or modify existing ones. "So hack around it," Mason demanded, voice rising. "Sir, he designed those security protocols to be tamper-proof. It's federal compliance standard. We're completely locked out until we can get proper authorization transfer documentation." "This is ridiculous," Mason snapped. "It's just door locks." "No, sir, it's not just door locks. It's climate control, server room access, fire safety systems, security cameras, and about 15 other integrated systems. Everything runs through the same authorization framework." That's when the real panic started. By 10 a.m., Summit Technologies looked like a disaster movie in slow motion. Employees were crowded in the parking lot, some trying to work from their cars, others just standing around looking lost. Mason had commandeered the reception area as his crisis command center, which mainly involved a lot of yelling into his phone and demanding that people make it work. The badge lockout was just the beginning. Around 10:30, payroll called an emergency meeting. Brittany Moore from finance looked like she hadn't slept, clutching a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "We've got a problem," she announced, which by that point was like announcing that water was wet. Monthly payroll processing requires dual-factor authentication. Wesley's hardware key was the secondary authorization token. Mason, now visibly sweating through his designer shirt, snapped back. "So get a new token." "It doesn't work that way," Brittany explained with the patience of someone talking to a particularly dense toddler. "The issuing agency requires 30 days advance notice for custodial officer changes. And guess who's listed as our primary contact for token reissuance?" The silence in that room was deafening. Meanwhile, our parts supplier, TechSource Industrial, had noticed something odd in their system. Around noon, I got a call from their compliance officer. Not Mason, not Summit's procurement team, but me directly. "Mr. Adams," the voice said, professional but concerned, "we're showing that Summit Technologies' primary compliance officer authorization expired yesterday. Our system automatically flagged your account for security review. Can you verify your current employment status?" I was sitting in Murphy's diner at the time, enjoying a decent burger and watching the chaos unfold from a distance. I still had access to the company Slack through an old administrative account that nobody had remembered to deactivate. It was like having front row seats to a train wreck. "I'm no longer employed with Summit Technologies as of yesterday," I told them honestly. "I was terminated without standard offboarding procedures." "I see. Well, that creates a significant problem. Our vendor agreements require current, verified compliance oversight. Without proper custodial certification, we'll need to suspend all shipments pending a compliance audit." TechSource wasn't some minor vendor. They supplied about 60% of our critical hardware components. Losing them meant production delays, missed deadlines, angry customers, and a cascade of contract violations. But that was just Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, things got really interesting. Someone in Mason's inner circle, I suspect it was Colton Reed, the frat buddy he'd promoted to manage IT security, tried to force a system override on the main server authentication protocols. Instead of gaining access, they triggered what we called a catastrophic lockdown event. Every security system in the building went into full defensive mode. Badge readers, climate control, server room access, even the coffee machines that were connected to our internal network, everything locked down hard. Jordan Palmer called me directly, bypassing Mason entirely. Wesley, I know you don't work here anymore, but we're in serious trouble. The building climate control is stuck at 85 degrees. The server room temperature is climbing toward critical levels. If those servers overheat, we're looking at complete data loss. Sounds like you need to call your new custodial officer, I said calmly. We don't have one. Mason never appointed a replacement. He just assumed someone else would figure it out. I took a sip of my coffee and watched the Summit Technologies building across the street through the diner window. I could see people opening windows, some employees standing outside in the heat just to cool down. Well, Jordan, I'm not authorized to help anymore. That was made very clear to me. That's when Ashley Garcia from Pinnacle Consulting Group walked into my life. I'd heard about Pinnacle. They were the company that serious tech firms called when their operations were falling apart. Ashley had a reputation for surgical precision in fixing broken systems and, more importantly, for poaching the best talent from companies too stupid to recognize what they had. She found me at Murphy's Diner on Thursday morning. Professional woman with steel gray hair, handshake like a vice grip, and a smile that said she knew exactly what was happening across the street. "Mr. Adams," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I've been trying to figure out how Summit Technologies managed to run so smoothly for over a decade. I think I'm looking at the answer." "I don't work there anymore," I said, though I was curious where this was heading. "I know. That's why I'm here." She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "We've been watching Summit's situation develop. 3 of their former clients have reached out to us in the past 48 hours, asking if we know anyone who could handle their operational consulting needs. The interview, if you could call it that, lasted about 10 minutes. Ashley laid out what Pinnacle was looking for. Someone with deep operational expertise, someone who understood both the technical and legal sides of running complex systems, someone who could step into chaos and impose order. The position comes with significant equity, your own team, and complete operational autonomy, she said. Plus, we're expanding into your specialty area, compliance and operational infrastructure for tech companies. I looked out the window at Summit Technologies, where employees were still dealing with climate control failures and badge reader malfunctions. Mason's crisis. Management style seemed to involve a lot of pointing and shouting, which wasn't solving anything. "When would you need an answer?" I asked. "You already gave me one by not saying no immediately," Ashley replied with that sharp smile. "Can you start Monday?" Back at Summit, the real crisis was just beginning. The Apex Industries deal, worth $175 million and representing about 40% of Summit's projected annual revenue, was scheduled for final contract review on Friday. Apex's legal team had requested updated cybersecurity certifications as part of their due diligence process, standard procedure for any major technology partnership. The request went to Mason's office on Thursday afternoon. Friday morning, Mason discovered what real panic felt like. Apex Industries' cybersecurity certification request had bounced 3 times through Summit's system. Every attempt to generate the required documentation failed because the digital signatures were still tied to my authorization codes. Mason's IT team had spent Thursday night trying to manually recreate the compliance reports, but Apex's automated verification system kept rejecting them. That's when Lance Brooks from Apex's legal department made the call that ended everything. He didn't call Mason, he didn't call Summit's legal team. He called me directly because my name was still listed as the primary contact on every single cybersecurity framework certification Summit Technologies held. "Mr. Adams," Lance said when I answered, "this is somewhat unusual, but we're having difficulty verifying Summit Technologies' current compliance status. Your name appears as the certified custodial officer on all their security protocols, but we're getting conflicting information about your employment status." I was in my new office at Pinnacle Consulting at the time, reviewing client files and enjoying the view of Summit's building across the street. Through the window, I could see people moving around frantically in Mason's conference room. "Mr. Brooks, I appreciate you calling me directly," I said. "I was terminated from Summit Technologies on Tuesday without proper offboarding procedures. I'm no longer affiliated with the company and cannot verify the current state of their security systems or compliance protocols." The silence on Lance's end stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "I see," he finally said. "That creates a significant regulatory concern. Our partnership agreement requires continuous verified cybersecurity oversight. If there's been a break in custodial authority, you'll need to make your own assessment about their current capabilities," I told him. "I can't speak to what they've implemented since my departure." 2 hours later, Apex Industries sent the email that destroyed Mason's world. Due to unresolved compliance custody issues and inability to verify current cybersecurity protocols, we are suspending all partnership negotiations pending a comprehensive third-party security audit. $175 million. Gone. The board called an emergency meeting for 2 p.m. that Friday. Hunter Walsh, who hadn't set foot in Summit Technologies for 18 months, walked through those malfunctioning badge readers like a man returning to survey the ruins of his life's work. I didn't need to be in that conference room to know what happened next. The story spread through the industry grapevine faster than a computer virus. Hunter had built Summit Technologies over 20 years into a company that major corporations trusted with their most critical infrastructure projects. In less than a week, his son had turned it into a cautionary tale about nepotism and incompetence. Cameron Davis, Summit's general counsel, laid out the damage in precise, devastating detail. Invalid compliance structures, frozen vendor relationships, regulatory violations, and now the loss of their biggest contract due to what he called catastrophic operational negligence. Mason tried to salvage something, blaming legacy systems and claiming the problems were temporary growing pains. But you can't spin away $175 million in lost revenue or explain to the IRS why your compliance officer disappeared without proper documentation. Hunter Walsh, by all accounts, listened to it all in complete silence. Then he asked one question. Where is Wesley Adams now? The answer, of course, was that I was across the street, building something new. Pinnacle Consulting had given me everything Mason never understood I needed: recognition for expertise, authority to implement solutions, and the resources to do the job right. Within 2 weeks, I had a team of 6 specialists and a client list that included 2 of Summit's former partners who'd grown nervous about their operational stability. The industry is smaller than people think. Word travels fast when a company's operations collapse, and it travels even faster when the person who kept everything running lands somewhere else. My phone started ringing with calls from executives who remembered my name from compliance meetings and vendor conferences over the years. 6 months later, I was reviewing quarterly reports for my 4th major client when Mason's LinkedIn update popped up in my news feed, exploring new opportunities in transformational leadership. Corporate speak for daddy finally fired me. Hunter had returned to Summit Technologies, brought in a crisis management team, and spent 3 months trying to rebuild relationships that Mason had destroyed in 3 days. Some vendors came back, some clients renewed their contracts. But the Apex deal was gone forever, and with it went about 40% of Summit's projected growth. Mason, meanwhile, had been quietly moved to what Hunter diplomatically called a strategic advisory role, which meant he had an office, a salary, and absolutely no authority to touch anything important. 6 months later, even that became too much to maintain. The final irony came a year after my firing, when Hunter Walsh called me directly. "Wesley," he said, and I could hear the weight of everything that had happened in his voice. "I owe you an apology. I should have handled the transition better. I should have made sure Mason understood what you meant to this company." "Ancient history, Hunter," I told him, and I meant it. "How are you holding up? We're surviving, rebuilding. It's going to take years to get back to where we were." He paused. "I don't suppose you'd consider coming back. I could make it worth your while." I looked out my office window at the building where I'd spent 13 years of my life, where I'd built systems and relationships and expertise that one stupid kid had destroyed in a moment of ego-driven theater. "I appreciate the offer, Hunter. I really do. But I'm pretty happy where I am." And I was. Pinnacle had promoted me to senior partner. My team was handling operational consulting for companies that understood the value of institutional knowledge and treated their key people like assets instead of dead weight. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined and working with clients who respected expertise over flashy presentations. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just letting gravity do what it always does when someone kicks out the foundation and then building something better in a place where people understand what really matters. These days, I sleep pretty well at night. Experience isn't just about years on the job. It's about understanding that the most critical work often happens quietly, handled by people who don't need their names and headlines to keep the foundation solid. In the end, you can inherit a title and buy yourself authority, but you can't purchase the institutional knowledge that takes decades to build, and when you discard it carelessly, the market has a way of teaching you exactly what it was worth.